What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and I hope you're all doing well today. We've finally made it to the third and final Rogue Talent Tree preliminary discussion. For this video, we'll be going over the initial thoughts and speculations that I have on the Assassination spec tree for Dragonflight. I have already covered both Subtlety and Outlaw, as well as the initial general thoughts of the class-wide Rogue tree on the channel, so if you're interested in those particular topics, then I recommend checking those videos out, and maybe even subscribing if you like what you see, as I plan on covering quite a lot of Rogue stuff and Dragonflight stuff in general in the coming months. I've also been doing a few Twitch streams each week if you have any questions that you want to ask in person, or if you just want to see some Rogue key stuffs, especially with the return of many old dungeons with Season 4 right around the corner. Oh, and please keep in mind, the following information is very subject to change, as we're still early in Dragonflight's alpha, so some of these moves may be completely gone or moved around or reworked before we even see them on live servers. Assassination's talent tree is the most narrow of the three rogue specs, and also offers the least unique choices of the three as well. There are a total of 38 different talents on Assassination's tree. That is compared to the 44, 45-ish on both Subtlety and Outlaw's options, which is a noticeable chunk less of choice. This is the result of Assassination having 3 talents that take up to 3 talent points each to max out. Again, comparing to both Subtlety and Outlaw's tree, who have 0 of these 3-point talents, this results in Assassination's choices being a little bit more limited. On the positive side of this, however, Assassination still has a sizable amount of new talent options coming in Dragonflight, with a total of 11 of its 38 choices being either new, coming from older expansions, or pulled from the PvP-specific talent section and being added to that main spec tree. As is expected, Assassination's damage-modifying talents primarily revolve around poison and bleed damage, though there are some effects that will improve the damage of moves such as Fan of Knives and Mutilate. We'll go over the brand new effects coming to Assassination's talent tree, then some effects that are simply worthwhile to mention or have interesting bits of insight that I can give you on the tree. As I always mention, the new Dragonflight talent tree system does require you to invest a certain number of points to pass thresholds and continue further down the tree, with these breakpoints being at 8 talent points and 20 talent points respectively. We will earn a spec talent point every other level starting at level 10, which leaves us with 30 talent points to spend across the whole tree by the time we hit level 70, the new cap in Dragonflight. Starting with our first new effect near the top, we have Bloody Mess. This is a 2-point talent that increases our Garrote and Rupture damage by 10% and 20% respectively. This talent is a nice and simple buff to our main bleeds, and is something we'll likely pick up very early on in virtually any build, whether it be single target or AoE, since we'll be applying and maintaining these buffs virtually 100% of the time. Another early talent, and arguably one of the most potent things in Assassination's new toolkit, is Atrophic Poison. This gives us access to a non-lethal poison that will cause attacks to have a 10% chance of reducing the target's damage dealt by 3% for 10 seconds. This is frankly a huge advantage to bringing Assassination to raids, as reducing a boss's damage by 3% is pretty massive for progression fights. So if this remains unchanged, then we are very likely to see Assassination rogues, at least one, in Race to World First and Hall of Fame guilds. There's also the fact that this will likely be affected by the Shiv effect, meaning it should do an even larger amount of damage reduction for a short period of time. However, this is a bit of a downside if you prefer to play Subtlety or Outlaw, unless there are some tweaks done to move this Atrophic Poison effect to the main rogue tree so that all 3 specs have access to it, but still, this is a huge benefit to bring to a group. Even in Mythic Plus, I could see this being pretty good, especially in higher keys and tyrannical weeks, or just the fact that you can apply this with Fan of Knives to reduce damage of an entire pack of enemies. On this same row, albeit shoved off in the corner on a dead end, we have Intent to Kill. This is currently a PvP talent, and it gives you a shortened cooldown on Shadow Step if you use it on a target that has Vendetta applied to them. However, as we'll go over in a little bit, Vendetta is kinda sorta gone. So instead, this talent will reduce the cooldown of Shadow Step by a lesser amount, only 33%, but just requires Garrote to be active on the target, and you use Garrote way more often than you can use in Vendetta, so I think this is still really handy, especially since you can now talent into 2 charges of Shadow Step as Assassination. Skipping down to row 6, we have Flying Daggers, yet another PvP talent that has been reworked and applied to the regular Assassination tree. Fan of Knives' radius is increased to 15 yards, and deals 15% more damage when it strikes at least 5 targets. Now, Fan of Knives doesn't exactly do crazy big damage, but The extra AoE radius means in situations like a big Mythic Plus pull that isn't very well grouped together, then you have an option of hitting more targets, which means more chances for Seal Fate to proc to give you extra combo points. Still pretty useful, but the damage percent is almost an afterthought compared to the extended radius. Row 6 is home to a bunch of our new effects, by the way, because right next to Flying Daggers we have Vicious Venoms. Your Mutilates and auto attacks deal 25% of their damage as nature type against targets that have at least one weapon poison effect active on them. This wording is a little weird because it could mean that it simply translates a portion of your total damage of your ability into nature, or it's dealing the full damage like it normally would, and then it's giving you a 25% boost on top as nature damage. If it's an additive effect, then that is a pretty huge chunk of free damage for literally no effort. But even if it's just a conversion effect, then that means more of our Mutilates and auto attack damage is going to bypass armor and it'll be buffed by that 20% nature damage boost from Shiv, which is pretty sweet. And now for another spicy talent, we have Deathmark. This is Assassination's new major offensive cooldown, since Vendetta has gone the way of the dodo and looks like it's not going to be returning for Dragonflight. Deathmark is a 2-minute cooldown that does a chunk of bleed damage over 15 seconds. Whatever target you hit with Deathmark will have all of its garrots, ruptures, and lethal poisons on it be duplicated when applied. This is a really interesting effect, especially since all of these damage sources are buffed by other components of the talent tree. It'll also be really snazzy if our empowered garrots are duplicated, because we can still pick up that 50% boost damage on garrot if used from stealth and for 3 seconds after breaking stealth. There's also a very potent talent that we'll be talking about next that could in theory double dip thanks to this new cooldown, so it's likely Assassination will have a very, very bursty single target cooldown with this new Deathmark. We do lose the whole see-through stealth effect that was part of Vendetta, so that is a bit of a downside for PvP usage. Now think about all those double garrots, ruptures, and deadly poisons that we have on our target thanks to that Deathmark cooldown I was just talking about. Meet Lethal Dose, a 2-point talent that increases your damage dealt to a target by 1 or 2% respectively for every bleed and poison effect you have on them. Yeah, so that's the bleed from Deathmark itself, 2 garrots, 2 ruptures, 2 deadly poisons, and potentially a few other effects too. So we'll say, I don't know, a 10% damage increase on top of all the damage your moves are already doing anyhow since they've been duplicated. Yeah, that's pretty awesome, so really when combining the two, you probably will not be missing Vendetta all that much. This talent sounds awesome, and it rewards you for playing your class well by keeping your debuffs active on your target, so that's a win-win in my book. Our next new effect is Amplifying Poison. This does a chunk of nature damage and applies a debuff called Amplification for 12 seconds. You can have up to 20 stacks of this on a target, and Envenom can consume 15 stacks to increase its damage by 30%. The damage component is about twice as much damage as Wound Poison does, plus you have that added perk of making Envenom hit a bit harder every now and then. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why would I bother using that when Deadly Poison does way more damage all the time? We're going to go out of order for just a moment so I can show you one of the new capstone effects, Dragon Tempered Blades. You can now apply 1 extra lethal and non-lethal poison to your weapons. So yeah, you can have Deadly Poison plus this new Amplifying Poison for even more nature damage, or if you're a PvPer, then you can opt out for Wound Poison instead so you still get your Mortal Wounds healing reduction without losing the damage of Deadly Poison. This also means you can have Numbing and Crippling Poison on at the same time, or more likely, the new Atrophic Poison instead of one of those other non-lethal poisons. This is such a simple yet cool effect that I think it will be a very popular talent choice in the future. Now, on to the last couple new talents. Scent of Blood, for those who played in Battle for Azeroth, was an Azerite armor trait you might remember. Pretty simple, it increases your agility for every rupture you have active on nearby enemies. By itself, not a crazy cool sounding effect, and you have to put multiple talent points into it. Until you pair it with the arguably best thing ever added to Assassination, and honestly the strongest sounding effect on this tree, other than Atrophic Poison, which is just really awesome. Indiscriminate Carnage. This is a 1.5-minute cooldown. Your next garrote and ruptures will apply to all enemies within 10 yards of your primary target. It will deal reduced damage past 8 targets though. But wow, AoE garrote and AoE rupture, that just sounds wild to me. The amount of burst AoE this will probably do just sounds so good for Assassination. Plus you get a thick agility buff from all those ruptures out thanks to Scent of Blood, which will make all these effects do even more damage. Your Venomous Wound energy regeneration will be through the roof in AoE burst thanks to this effect too, so you'll be able to just spam Fan of Knives for tons of combo points to spend on Crimson Tempests and whatever, and it just sounds really awesome, and I'm glad to see a new cooldown like this to help Assassination's Mythic Plus potential. Now, there are a couple quirks to the Assassination tree, but my general consensus is that this is a pretty great beginning to Dragonflight alpha testing to see so many interesting and potent effects that can have good synergy with the Assassination kit. Many effects were carried over from Shadowlands as well, with numerous legendary effects such as Dashing Scoundrel for even more energy regeneration via poison critical hits, Zul'jik Insignia for an execute damage profile, and Doomblade for more mutilate damage. Oh, and Tiny Toxic Blade for some reason. Yeah, honestly, there are only a couple lame-ish things that I think could or should be replaced, with Tiny Toxic Blade being a pretty unimpressive capstone effect. And for some reason, Venom Rush and Exsanguinate still exist. Venom Rush is frankly just so odd to still be around and could probably use a complete rework to be something, engaging or at least noticeable on the damage meters. And Exsanguinate hasn't really been good in the last 2 expansions, except I think during the Corruption Power era of Battle for Azeroth when you had a bajillion haste corruption effects. Maybe with Deathmark it'll be better now, but it doesn't exactly excite me to see it on the talent tree or taking up a talent point yet. Again, overall, a very good set of effects to choose from that could be tweaked just a little bit to make it really great. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Assassination can now very easily get 2 charges of Shadow Step, since one of them is on the main rogue tree, giving it a much needed bump up in its mobility to put it on even footing with the other 2 specs of rogue. I guess if I wanted to be really nitpicky, I could say I'm not sure how viable of a choice Blindside will ever be, as there really isn't anything on the Assassination tree that offers any perks or benefits to it. Most of the talent tree buffs poisons and bleeds, or makes them deal extra poison or bleed damage, or makes moves that don't do poison or bleed damage do poison or bleed damage. So not only is this move really not impacted by any of our choices, but physical damage is mitigated by armor value, making it even less important. I don't think it's really necessary for Assassination to have Blindside anymore, honestly, unless maybe they made some stacking damage boost for every time you use Ambush, and your next one does slightly more and you have to keep a buff window rolling. That'd give Assassination a bit more execute damage, especially since our main execute effect, Zul'jik Recipe, only affects poisons and bleeds, so again, kind of at odds with Ambush. Or, I don't know, maybe convert Ambush to nature damage or a big chunk of it? I don't know, I feel there's some solution to making Ambush a more important or integral part of the toolkit, and not just a random physical damage proc you can use every now and then that isn't buffed by basically anything. Anyways folks, I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive discussion on Assassination's new talent tree, or at least the early look we've gotten at it. I'm sure there are changes inbound for many, many things, so some of my small grievances might be remedied in future builds, I don't know. Again, this was me being pretty nitpicky because honestly, I think this is a very good set of options we have already. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section and maybe leave a like if you're feeling sassy. As always, my appreciation and gratitude to all of my viewers and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.